Let's get started on configuring iSCSI. iSCSI, as you know, uses standard gigabit Ethernet switches to connect ESXi hosts, multiple ESXi hosts, to a common disk array. There are 6 steps in configuring iSCSI storage. 1. Connect the SAN hardware. Then 2. Create the LUN on the disk array. 3. Create the virtual switch. 4. Connect the iSCSI adapter to the LUN. 5. Create a VMFS data store. And then 6. Create the virtual hard disks on the data store. The first thing to do is to purchase the disk array and then to put a second network interface card in each ESXi host to form the storage area network. Then get an Ethernet switch, and you can use one that you already have. And then use Ethernet cable to connect the ESXi hosts to the switch and to connect the switch to the disk array. That is our hardware installation. Then the next thing to do is to create a LUN on a disk array. And in this example, the manufacturer of the disk array is Synology. But this is just a disk array that I selected as an example. It is not a VMware product. To create a LUN on a disk array, I will select the Synology Assistant, which is used to configure my disk array. And I assign an IP address to the disk array. In this example, it's 172.16.0.50. And as you can see, there are no SCSI LUNs, there are no iSCSI LUNs in the system. So I click on Create. Set up iSCSI LUN properties. I take the default name, followed by Next. And then we see the IQN, which is the iSCSI qualified name, which we can see is Synology.com, which is the company that makes the disk array. Now we can also enable CHAP, the Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol, and this allows us to put a password on this disk array. So if somebody wants to connect to it, if an administrator wants to connect to this disk array from the ESXi host, then the administrator must have this password. This CHAP is used for authentication between the ESXi host and the disk array. I will not enable CHAP. Then I will click on Next. And then I will click on Apply, and we can see it is in the process of creating the LUN. Now you can see that the LUN has been successfully created and that it is ready. If we click on the tab that says iSCSI Target, we can see the name that we're going to have to connect to later, the IQN. This is called the iSCSI qualified name, and you can see the iSCSI qualified name on this disk array is IQN 2000-01.com.synology:diskstation.name. And we will talk about the IQN a little more later. Now that we have created the LUN on the disk array, then we can move on to creating a virtual switch to connect the iSCSI adapter to the LUN. To create a virtual switch, we will use the vSphere desktop client because that allows us to connect directly to an ESXi host. Now the vSphere web client does not allow us to connect directly to an ESXi host. It can only connect to vCenter server. We will use the vSphere web client later on in this section, but right now we will use the vSphere desktop client. I use the vSphere desktop client by clicking on the icon, typing in the IP address, the administrator name, and the password, and then I click on Log On. For my ESXi host, I click on the Configuration tab, And then under the Configuration tab, under Hardware, I select Networking, and you can see here is my existing virtual switch, vSwitch 0. To create a new virtual switch, to create the storage area network, I click on Add Networking. Under Add Networking, for connection type, I select VM kernel, and this allows me to set up an iSCSI SAN. Click on Next. Then I will select the second network interface card, which is in this iSCSI host. Don't use the first network interface card, VMNIC0. That's already been assigned to the production network. We want the second network interface card, which is called VMNIC1, and that will be for the storage area network. I click on Next. Then I will give the port group a label, such as SAN Datastore, followed by Next. And then I will assign an IP address, in this case 192.172.16.0.2 with a subnet mask of 255.255.0.0. Notice this IP address is totally different from the production network. Then we click on Next, and we click on Finish, and now you can see that a new virtual switch has been created. The next thing to do is to link that to the disk array. So then I go and I select Storage Adapters. I click on Storage Adapters, and I see there is no iSCSI software storage adapter. So I select Add. I click on Add, and under Add Storage Adapter, I select Add Software iSCSI Adapter. I click on OK, and it says a new software iSCSI adapter will be added, and I click on OK. And there is my new iSCSI software adapter. To configure that iSCSI software adapter, I click on Properties, and you can see it says in the Property window, iSCSI Initiator. So what is meant by an iSCSI Initiator? An iSCSI Initiator can be a piece of software or a piece of hardware that forwards SCSI traffic, meaning hard disk traffic, over an IP network to an iSCSI target, meaning a disk array. There are hardware and there are software iSCSI initiators. A software iSCSI initiator is whereby the ESXi host and the hypervisor do all the work. But a hardware iSCSI initiator takes the load off of the hypervisor. A dependent hardware iSCSI initiator takes some of the processing load off of the hypervisor, and an independent hardware adapter performs all iSCSI processing and takes the load off of the ESXi host. Of course, this isn't free, about $1,000 for one of these. And how much does a software iSCSI initiator cost? It doesn't cost anything. It's built into the hypervisor, so you know which one we are going to use. We select the iSCSI software adapter, followed by Properties, and under General, we can see that the status is enabled. If I click on the Networking tab, I can see it is not associated with any port group. I will click Add, and I will add it to a port group. I will select the SAN network on vSwitch 1, the one that we just created, followed by OK. And then we can see we get a little green checkbox that indicate that it is compliant. Right now, there is nothing under Dynamic Discovery. If we select Static Discovery, we can then manually enter the iSCSI target. So we click on Add, and then we type in the name of the iSCSI server, meaning the disk array, and the IP address, as you recall, is 192.16.0.15, and the default port number is 3260. Now, if I had configured CHAP, the Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol, on the disk array, I would have to do it here. But since I did not configure CHAP on the disk array, I do not need to configure it here. So I will click on OK and then OK. And now you can see it has recognized the iSCSI disk array. I click on Close, and it says a rescan of the host bus adapter is recommended for this configuration to change. Rescan adapter, and we say yes. And now you can see that the iSCSI software adapter now recognizes the disk array. The next thing to do is to create a VMFS data store. To create a VMFS data store, under the hardware column, we select storage. I click on storage, and now I can see the existing internal data store for the direct attached storage, but I want to add the disk array. So under data store, I click on add storage, and under storage type, I select disk/LUN, and this allows us to connect to iSCSI storage, and then I click on next. Then I select my disk array, which I previously configured. You can see there is the iSCSI qualified name, IQN. I click on next, and it says that the hard disk is blank and that a partition will be created and used. So I click on next. I then enter the name of the data store, and I will call it SAN Data Store, followed by next. And I could use all of the available space on the disk, but in this example, I will just use some of the space which is available on the disk. Then I will click on next. It is going to create a new data store. I click on finish, and now you can see this is our data store for the storage area network. This is our data store for the storage area network. Now we can create a virtual machine. We will create a virtual machine in which the virtual hard disk and the virtual machine files are stored on the disk array on the storage area network. To do that, I will right-click on my iSCSI host and select New Virtual Machine. I will select Custom Configuration. I will type in a name for the virtual machine, followed by Next, and here is where I can specify that I want the virtual machine files and the virtual hard disk to be stored, not on the hard disk inside the iSCSI host, but I want those files to be stored on the disk array on the storage area network. When we have a storage area network, it allows the virtual machine, virtual hard disks to be saved to the disk array on the storage area network. To view the VMFS data store so we can see the virtual hard disk that we just created, we can browse the data store. To browse the data store, we put the cursor on the data store, right-click, and select Browse Data Store. And now you can see here is a folder which has been created, which corresponds to the virtual machine that I just created. You can see here is the virtual hard disk, VMDK, our virtual hard disk file. The .nvram file contains the BIOS information, and the .vmx file contains the virtual machine configuration information. When we configure iSCSI storage area network, there are 6 main steps. 1, connect the storage area network hardware. 2, create a LUN on the disk array, 3, create a virtual switch, which creates the SAN. 4, connect the iSCSI adapter to the LUN. 5, create a VMFS data store on the LUN. And then 6, create the virtual machine's virtual hard disk files on the data store. And this concludes our section on iSCSI storage.